For 8 years, Brian Breminger was the quintessential U.S. Marine. And aside from a few tours overseas during which he never saw combat, by the way, he was mainly tasked with serving as a color guard at the White House over in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And for Yvonne Baldelli, who had met Brian in Southern California in 2009, he was everything that she wanted from a partner. She was successful in her own right. She was working in a management position at Procter & Gamble and wanted to find someone who shared those same values. But in 2011, as the relationship grew more serious, Brian retired from the Marines, and Yvonne was laid off from her job at Procter & Gamble. At this point in their lives, they were both sort of at a crossroads of what to do next. They really want to get a change of scenery, get out of Southern California, and that's when they landed on the small Panamanian island of Caranero, where they could find a small beachside house available to rent. And they had big dreams of their island lives. Brian wanted to become a singer, and Yvonne brought her sewing machine, and she wanted to start a small clothing business. So in September of 2011, the couple set off to Panama with Yvonne's beloved Cocker Spaniel named Georgia May. They stopped first in Panama City before traveling hundreds of miles to Bocas del Toro, an archipelago that contains the small island of Caranero. And almost immediately, Brian and Yvonne fell in love with both the location and the local American expats. They said that Brian and Yvonne appeared to be in love. Jones said he played there at Cosmic Crab a couple nights a week, and they were frequent visitors there. For Yvonne's family, blissfully unaware of Brian's lack of musical talent, the constant stream of happy phone calls and joyful emails made their life sound like a true adventure. But then in November 2011, the emails and calls from Yvonne to her family started to slow down, and Michelle, knowing that Yvonne loved to keep the family updated, felt like something was just off. Around November 26, Yvonne seemed to stop contacting her family, and Brian had become a ghost too, dropping off the face of the earth to Yvonne's family. So on December 14th, after weeks of not hearing from her sister, Michelle got a text. Only it wasn't from Yvonne. She said, "There was a number I didn't recognize and a text message on there that said, 'This is Brian. May I make arrangements to pick up my truck?'" And this shocked Michelle. She had been holding on to Brian's truck since he left for Panama, but now he was back in the U.S. without any word from Yvonne. Michelle sat up and then called the number, and the only thing she said when Brian answered was, "Where's my sister?" And Brian responded by asking, "Didn't you get my email?" Michelle said, "I haven't received any emails from anybody. It's been a few weeks." After that, she hung up the phone and went to her computer immediately. In her inbox was an email she had somehow missed, and it was sent from Brian's address. And what's strange is that Brian had never emailed her once in the past. And this is what he wrote. "I'm sure you've heard by now that Vonnie and I are no longer together," which just shocked Michelle. If they had broken up, Yvonne would have called her sister immediately. That's what sisters do. So she called Brian back, asking him point blank, what happened? And Brian said they had gotten into a fight because she found out he had a child with someone else. And now Yvonne suffered from a medical condition that made her unable to conceive a child. So Michelle knew that this realization would have been earth-shattering for her little sister. Michelle really starts immediately picking up on something is very suspicious about Brian. Who is this someone else that Brian alluded to? Well, her name is Kristen Werkhoven, and the two of them had known each other since 2004. While Brian was working with his color guard in the Marine Corps days, Kristen worked at the White House as an analyst. She had top secret security clearance and often worked directly with the president. So Brian and Kristen had their first child in 2010, at least 1 year after Brian and Yvonne started dating, which means, yes, those timelines overlap. He was essentially living a double life.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And what's even worse is that 2 weeks after Yvonne stopped messaging her family from Panama, they got married.
Oh,
Brian and Kristen got married in Southern California. So if you're Yvonne's family, you're like, what is going on here? When Michelle found all this out, this was a complete shock to her. She asked Brian whether Yvonne had left a note before she left, whether she had tried to call, and whether he knew where she was. And all he said to every question was no. And finally, Michelle said, I haven't heard from her, Brian. And he simply responded, well, I'm sure she's fine.
Oh my God.
10 days later, he calls Michelle again and asks if he could go pick up his truck. Michelle said, that's not a problem, and I think it's a good idea that you go with me to the police department since you're the last one to see her so that we can fill out a missing persons report. Because how come you haven't done that already if you don't know what happened to her?
Like any normal person would.
While Michelle waited for Brian to come by, she checked her email and she found another message that she said she overlooked. Only this time it came from Yvonne's email address. It read, Hi sis, just an update. Brian and I are no longer together. I should have trusted my instincts that he is a lying, cheating. I'm headed to Costa Rica with a man I met when we first got to Bocas. But even though this email was sent from Yvonne's email address, Michelle wasn't quite sure. And adding to the strangeness, 3 weeks after the supposed message from Yvonne, Michelle received another one, and it read, "Miss you and everyone at home. I'm starting to get a little homesick. I'm working on plans to get home as early as the second week of January. I've been living with cliffhangers for a while. Love you, sis, Yvonne." At this point, they felt like at least she was safe. The same day Michelle received the email, Brian knocked on her door to ask if he could pick up his truck. Michelle said he was in a hurry, but he was calm. The interaction was all business, and since she had received the email from Yvonne, Michelle no longer felt the need to go to the police. But after Brian got his truck, those reassuring emails stopped again. On January 6, 2012, Michelle wrote an email to Yvonne with the subject line, "Worried." She wrote, "I just want to make sure you weren't kidnapped or someone pretending to be you, haha. There's my paranoid suspicious mind, or maybe too many 48 hours. And Yvonne never responded to that email to her sister. But still, Michelle remained hopeful that Yvonne would be in town for the family reunion. But when that came and went, she knew after that the family needed to have a conversation. So Michelle met up with her dad and told him she did not leave Panama. At this point, she's super suspicious, so Michelle reached out to her cousin to see if they could find out where Yvonne's emails had been sent from. The cousin had some technical background, very smart. Go look at the email headers. You can find the IP addresses so that you can actually see where those emails are being sent from. While the emails from Panama actually originated from Panama, so the IP addresses came back to that country, the email where Yvonne said she had run off to Costa Rica actually came from, guess where? California.
Yep.
Dana Point, California. Yep. In Southern
What an idiot.
Cal. Yep. And meanwhile, the email Brian had sent to Michelle about the breakup also came from California.
Oh,
So
shocking.
not only that, the same IP address.
Oh my God.
They were exactly where Brian had moved to after he returned to the States.
Perfect.
Michelle's worst nightmare had come true. Brian had used Yvonne's email account to impersonate her, and according to Michelle, this yielded only one answer about her sister's whereabouts. Michelle said, "My sister's dead and I'm never going to see her again." It's like someone calling you up and telling you that your loved one got in a car accident or something. I mean, I knew I wasn't comfortable with her going, but you don't really think it's going to happen. She then took this digital evidence straight to her local police department, who then referred her to the FBI and State Department, and they were able to file a missing persons report in Panama. Once Michelle contacted the American Embassy in Panama, they confirmed that there is no record of Yvonne ever leaving Panama or entering Costa Rica. 2 months after Yvonne's family filed a missing persons report, they traveled to Panama themselves to conduct their own independent investigation. And at this point, they knew they were looking for Yvonne's remains. They contacted American private investigator Don Winter, who had assisted in the arrest of 3 serial killers in the area. As an ex-intelligence officer, when Yvonne's family described the manner of her disappearance, Don responded, "I think the chances that she's running around in Costa Rica somewhere with some other dude are damn near zero." And just straight from the jump, Don, he was like, this is pretty clear here. Brian was involved in Yvonne's disappearance. So Don planned to turn Yvonne's story into an international headline by putting pressure on the Panamanian government to investigate her case to protect its tourism industry. He also convinced Jim and Lillian to give blood samples to the Panamanian investigators so they could test them against any human remains they found on the island. And then when Yvonne's family finally reached the tiny island, she briefly called home and they held a press conference. After this press conference, the Panamanian police announced that Yvonne was a victim of foul play and Brian was their chief suspect. However, since Brian was safely back in the U.S., he didn't have to respond to their investigation in any meaningful way. The locals began revealing some of their interactions with Brian for the few months that he was their neighbor. Local bar owner Jeff Salzman said, "To me, he was a very scary person. He was not the kind of person I wanted to be around. He knew that Yvonne's face showed signs of abuse. As I recall, it was black eyes and blackness around the face and bruises. She was trying to hide and not speak of it." So now we have, clear allegations of domestic violence here. There's clear evidence of this. But the question remained for the search team. Where was Yvonne's remains? Just a few feet from their home, there were thousands of square miles of water, and just 20 yards away, there was a thick, deep, impenetrable swamp. The private investigator, Don Winter, described the search area as tropical, so you have every kind of bug and critter that you can think of, spiders and snakes. It's not a place to go slogging around. However, as FBI agents were now diving off the coast of Panama, others in California were seriously investigating Brian as a person of interest. And on March 21st, 2012, they popped by his home for a surprise interview. And Brian surprisingly allowed them to come in and talk to him. And so they questioned him for hours, but he stuck to his story. But then it gets even dumber on his part, because when he let these FBI agents in, they're not just questioning him, they're also, in their eyes, they're potentially in a killer's home. So they start scanning around what they can see. And lo and behold, there's a Sony Vaio laptop. And guess what? That laptop is the very same computer that Yvonne had brought with her to Panama.
Oh my God.
They were able to get a warrant to take that laptop into evidence, and they left Brian's apartment and soon discovered that Brian had used it to send all the emails supposedly from Yvonne. They also discovered a selfie Yvonne had taken of herself with a large black eye.
Oh my God, that's so upsetting.
Yeah.
Jesus.
While the PI Don's campaign was working, as a joint FBI Panamanian investigation was focusing in on the home Brian and Yvonne shared down there, luminol tests revealed the presence of blood in the bedroom and in another room in the house, indicating that in fact a violent struggle had taken place there. And Don continued his independent work, speaking with residents and putting together a timeline of Yvonne's last moments. Yvonne was murdered in the early morning hours of November 27th, 2011. He said locals could hear a series of violent fights, altercations, screaming and yelling, glass breaking, slamming up against the building. And later that day, Brian had been telling anyone who would listen that Yvonne had run off with another man. And he played up that role of the abandoned boyfriend and then gave away Yvonne's personal possessions, such as her clothing and even her swimsuits. But what about Yvonne's dog, Georgia May?
God.
According to Don's theory, if people saw the dog running around without her because she had gone to Costa Rica with some random guy, everyone would know Brian's story was made up. So he must have gotten rid of the dog as well.
No.
So you can put that together pretty easily. A few days later, he used Yvonne's card to pull cash out of an ATM and bought a round of drinks for the girls at a bar. He said, "Thanks, Vonnie," as he raised a toast. A few days later, he used Yvonne's card once more to pull out cash in Costa Rica, likely to make people believe that she had in fact left Panama and went to Costa Rica, as his email said. Once he returned to the U.S., one friend messaged Brian and told him to say hi to Yvonne. Brian responded that he had ditched the... And most damning, a few weeks after Yvonne's disappearance, Brian was selling a machete on Facebook.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
And he wrote in the comments saying, "I only dismembered one stripper with it. It's hardly used."
Ew. God.
And luckily, the FBI was closing in on Brian. On June 26, 2013, just 6 days after Kristen gave birth to their child, the FBI arrested Brian and charged him with 13 felonies relating to the cover-up of Yvonne's death, but not her actual murder. However, Assistant U.S. Attorney Hamilton Arenson named him as the prime suspect. And aside from the forensic evidence and Yvonne's stolen laptop, Hamilton pointed to a Google search Brian had made in which he asked how to clean blood off a mattress. However, despite the overwhelming evidence, Brian initially pleaded not guilty to the 13 felonies. He was held without bail in a San Diego federal jail awaiting trial in Panama for additional charges. Then only 2 months after Brian pleaded not guilty, a local worker on the Panamanian island was walking only a few hundred yards away from where Yvonne's family had been searching when they came across a military duffel bag and 2 large trash bags. Inside, the worker found skeletalized human remains, and DNA tests conducted shortly thereafter confirmed that the remains were those of Yvonne Baldelli. In September 2014, Brian was officially charged with Yvonne's murder. He still pleaded innocent, all the while his wife Kristen never left his side. And while this case was closing in on Brian, time was running out for Michelle. In the spring of 2014, she had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. And in September of that year, she gave a taped deposition in which she described Brian's actions after the murder. She even fainted during her testimony. Michelle said, "This might be the last thing I get to do for her, over and over and over again, because it will be on camera forever." Michelle sadly passed away just months later in December of 2014.
Oh my God.
I mean, this poor family, it's just so much
Horrific.
tragedy, horrible. Then in April 2015, a bombshell emerged in the case. An agreement with Panama. Brian would be tried on U.S. soil for the crime. And as the case was set to head to trial in 2016, the machete Brian had sold on Facebook Marketplace had been found. And while the blade had been cleaned, underneath the handle, investigators were able to recover traces of Yvonne's blood and DNA. Due to this discovery, Brian then entered into a plea bargain and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder of Yvonne Baldelli. and he was sentenced to just 26 years in federal prison. Just crazy. And finally, with the case over, Yvonne's remains were laid to rest at sea alongside her sister Michelle.